Excited to have Matt Price with us tonight. He's going to talk about unfair advantages. I had like a bio for Matt that I printed out, but then kind of taking a page from Matt's book, I decided just to improv it and just
Nice.
make a bunch of shit up.
Yeah, and you said the first cuss word, so I'm even better. I feel better
I think
now.
we have a cap on 10, so I feel confident. Matt might push us, the over-under is at 10,
Yep.
So place your bets now. But Matt's an entrepreneur currently with the COO at Killer Creamery, right? Which, if you're not familiar with him, we've got the founder, Louis Armstrong here, as well as a lot of the employees. I'll let Matt describe what it is, but how I describe it, it's like keto ice cream that actually tastes good.
Sugar-free, that was it. You had it almost ready. You almost had it right.
Matt has done a bunch of stuff in his career, as well as is a venture partner with Connetic, a firm that is taken a real interest in Boise and investing in companies here. Matt has been, he's been at the venture college since I was first year, almost 3 years ago, and has just been a key supporter for us, giving back, and I think is relatively, everyone's kind of new to Boise these days, but Matt's relatively new, but has really embraced the ethos of give first and good things will happen. So I'm just excited to have Matt here tonight and have him talk about unfair advantages, and you're in for a treat. We're going to have some time at the end for Q&A. So Matt will get through his presentation, and I'm sure there will be lots of thoughts, comments, questions, no snide remarks. But we'll save that for the end, and we'll be able to walk through it then. So I will turn it over to Matt.
Awesome. Thanks for coming and having me. It's kind of amazing to have this many people and that many people on Zoom that actually really care about my musings. It's kind of and it's an interesting group because they're first-time entrepreneurs, students, accomplished entrepreneurs. We've got a published IP author who flew in from the Midwest to join, and he will certainly be put on the spot. So Vance Van Drake, happy to have just everyone here, and I hope the subject matter is interesting. And what is interesting is when Nick asked me to do this, I had given a talk similar at the Trailhead in 2018. I think I was still in Sun Valley when I did it. Yeah. And it was to a crowd much smaller than this, but it was something where I remember correctly, there was a couple people that were a bit offended, and there were some, I think, what I thought were thoughtful analogies that, coming into an ecosystem, that perspective that I had brought with me from a whole myriad of failure. I mean, tonight you won't hear one thing about my successes. You don't learn anything in success. I mean, there's a lot more lessons to be learned through the struggles and failures of others, and a lot of these, all of these unfair advantages came from that struggle. My only hope is that I can give back to the students and the community here and everyone listening, so that these are things I wish I knew on day one, and I don't know any way to say it. About 12 hours ago, I looked at the deck I was going to present and realized it was 2018, and said this was pre-pandemic, and everything for me in terms of how I think about things has been changed a bit. So I put this together in the last 4 hours. The good news is you'll see I hate pitch decks, so it's not going to wow you with any crazy design. Things about me. This is on my honeymoon in Switzerland. This kind of sums me up in a nutshell. And anybody that's worked with me or knows me probably thinks that picture is pretty relevant, but not afraid. I should be afraid of more things. I'll put it that way. I hate decks. I really do. It also could be because I'm a wild contrarian, and in every ecosystem, a lot of the mentorship and guidance is around the pitch and the pitch decks, and how to raise and how to like get to that spot where to raise money. And I I've been through thousands, both on the due diligence side and on the pitching side. And I've come to realize that if I could help anyone, there's a million ways you can learn about DEX. But if we can think about how to allocate capital, if we can think all about the things that come after the raise, I think in itself, you start to fix your pitch. You really like widen your maturity on the subject matter. And my belief is that you will get funded just as fast, maybe even easier by focusing on what happens after the check hits. Having the check hit, and Lewis is here. He was a first-time founder in Boise. You think that having that big round, all the money hit, will be this incredibly exciting, go celebrate thing, and it's not. I always go through a little bit of like a depression when that money hits, because to raise the round, you have to be telling yourself and everybody else this most optimistic, positive future of all the things you're doing. And when the money hits, you stop and you're like, shit, like now I have to go and execute. And that is a pretty lonely place to be. I did freestyle my own wedding vows. And I thought that was worth mentioning here because a lot of this is also freestyle. It turns out freestyling your own wedding vows is pretty hard. I was a little bit too bullish that I could do it. My wife is probably listening, but I did it and it sounded great, but I was absolutely terrified. So I don't know if I'd recommend that, but so just my purpose tonight is just really to give you some things to think about that I wish I would have had on day one. There's so many publications, there's so many articles, there's so many speakers that talk ad nauseum about everything in this startup world. And it is in itself pretty frustrating. It can be overwhelming. And who do you listen to? How do you filter that stuff? And I hope tonight some of the things that are in here aren't in those books. They aren't in those articles. And maybe there are a few of them, but I really try to stay away from mainstream narrative. I'm a wild contrarian. So if everybody's driving on the right side of the road, I'm coming on the left. And it's something that I used to hate about myself. I really did. I didn't think I fit any mold, and I didn't think that I always felt like an outsider. And then I realized one day that is a superpower of mine. It takes some courage to walk a contrarian path, especially, I guess, entrepreneurship and company building is full of more contrarians than not. But the Main Street narrative seeps into the way investors think, the way people want their pitches done. And I've done well by staying away from it. I don't know, I'm not advising you to do whatever your personality speaks to, but and something too is I am not that smart. I've done a good job of surrounding myself with smart people. I've done a great job of being consummate observationist, but don't take anything in here as if it's Matt says do this and you're gonna exit your company for $50 million, because that's just not true. Unfair advantages. Shocker, the first one's money. I have lived in my career with a foot as an operator and a foot as a venture capitalist for over 10 years. And it's been double or triple the workload. But what you start to realize, if you have a foot in both worlds, are the parallel paths to a lot of this. So as both an investor, due diligence person, and an operator, the through line for me has always been pretty obvious because there's so many things, common themes through both of them that I think help you become a better CEO, help you become a better capital raiser, and a better leader. I mean, just if you know how the VCs think first, then you have such an advantage to going in and pitching them and securing capital. Okay, problem with capital though, is it only really does two things in the end. I could go around the room and ask everybody, what do you think capital does? What do you think capital does? And I won't do that, but capital is a weird thing. And I always like to say, who is capital? As if it's a partner or person in the business. We spend, again, so much time in pursuit of it to prepare ourselves for, to speak to that investor. But we lose focus about what capital really does. It doesn't fix anything. It doesn't fix one thing. And you could say that it fixes your salary. You could say that it keeps your lights on, because it does there. But if I hand you guys $1 million today and your business isn't bulletproof, your mental processes aren't bulletproof, all those many things that most first-time founders will never know, capital does two things. It amplifies and it magnifies the people and the plans that it goes into. In my experience, again, not a super smart person, I have always found capital to be a magnifier of business misalignments, bad plans, things that weren't clear, really strategies that weren't thought through. And very quickly you realize that, oh man, this was not what I thought it was. It only is as good as the people it's in the hands of, and the hands are only as good as the minds that it's in the hands of.
Can you give an example of when somebody was
When what?
somebody was overfunded?
I mean, tons.
I mean, where that like showed up, right?
Yeah. You ruined my best slide, Vance. Jeez. I don't know how you Cincinnati guys do it, but let's tone it down. Yeah, so it speaks to a couple of things. One, I have been part of a company that that continued to grow in valuation, raised an absolute obscene amount of money, got to about $100 million valuation. And you know where capital got us? Recapitalized at $2 million valuation when the company was built incorrectly. And there's so much money, but there were so many opportunities to build it incorrectly. And what happens is, traditionally, you start hiring. That's the first thing you typically do. Hiring's hard, really hard. And it's really hard at the early stage because you can't hire a professional big company person. There are exceptions to that, but you're really talking about like a carnival worker like I am, or some of these other people here, where it's hard. That's all I can say. And you start to hire more and more and more people. The tendency then is to hire the highest caliber person to raise more money. What happens is company starts to get built wide, really wide, but it doesn't go forward at all. You get to a place where your valuation is infinitely bigger than what you're actually worth if you're using revenue or any of those other metrics. Being overvalued is not a good thing. It isn't. And I hope everyone can kind of wrap their minds around that. Not a good thing in my opinion. If you need to continue to keep raising that capital, having a realistic valuation and growing at a reasonable pace is pretty much foolproof in terms of not going to have a down round. It's kind of like wine. I think that companies have to struggle a little bit to be really good. So I don't know if that answered your question. I could have spent all night on this. Now my slide. This is what I found capital to be as a first-time founder. First startup, first-time founder. I thought it was like this private jet, big party, champagne bottles. And what I found out was it was a kid hopped up on sugar, taming the cat in the bathtub. And that is literally a visual that I think about all the time. And for anybody that's raised capital in here, the people that have actually put it to work the first time, I don't care where you went to school. I don't care, how well trained you are. This is what you get for that first time. Maybe I wasn't as cute as these kids, but nor the cat. Turns out capital doesn't actually fix that much. Anybody want to, I'll stop really quickly. Anybody has any follow-up questions or on that section? Awesome, it means the picture got it. Unfair advantage. So I had a whole different way to think about this today. And I made the mistake of sitting with an IP attorney and funneling all my thoughts to him. And I'm a freestyling, spontaneous guy, and he had me in all these outlines. And I said that I like what you're saying, and I left the room and I went actually down the block somewhere else. Know thyself, though, Vance. It stayed. Knowing thyself. So as Nick said, I'm a venture partner in a fund based in the greater Cincinnati area. And the entire fund thesis is built around, there's so much bias in venture capital. And bias, we think bias, we go to that extreme place with bias. But bias can be, I just like people that think like me. I just like people that sound like me, and the thesis, and one I fell in love with those guys is they said most VCs are art critics. They come in the room and then they filter your pitch through it, and it goes through all these levels of bias. So what they built, and the founder of the fund actually wrote the original Moneyball algorithm, if you guys have ever seen the movie. Problem is, and if he's watching, I'm sorry, Brad, but he did it at the University of Kentucky. And it turns out the students at Yale get published a little bit easier, and they have a little bit more money to commercialize. But nonetheless, he sees this opportunity that he can run a Moneyball approach through venture capital. And it's a crazy thing to think about, because he's saying, and now I'm saying, do we want to pay for is paying for past performance a great predictor of forward-looking success? Maybe. But it was not. I mean, the returns other than the top 10, VC funds are usually pretty horrible. So so you go through a behavioral kind of assessment called Wendell, and this happens to be mine. And knowing myself, I mean, this really happened. I remember seeing this the first time in a boardroom in Cincinnati with people I don't know, and pulls this up on the screen, and the managing partner says, "Holy shit, this guy's a weird dude," in front of like everybody. And so yeah, it was a little off-putting, but really, I'm a strategist. So strategists are generally cordial and composed. I don't know if I'm all that. Like other enterprisers, strategists are innovative champions, big picture thinkers, yet are more precise, analytical, and organized. My wife would disagree with all of those bottom three. But I think this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. And this is why they called me weird, was because you've got, an alpha leadership trait, quiet, purposeful, and exact. And that is, and I don't know, Vance, you're probably the behavioral analytic guru here. Would you look at that and say it's weird?
I would look at you and say you're weird.
Right. Fair. But what was yours? Like, you're a closer, right? Do you remember what your traits are?
Yeah, I'm a champion, so I'm not as bossy as you. I'm more personable than you, so I'm less shy.
For sure.
People like me more than they like.
Yep.
It's pretty much all your things, but like a little bit.
It's like you're the best possible version of me.
I like it.
You're the one who my wife should have married. Is that what you're saying? Know thyself. Again, building a company is talk about all the different unfair advantages, and maybe I was born, my dad had money, or I was born poor. I was born kind of lower middle class, but I certainly didn't come from any big network or Ivy League school. And again, like I said in the beginning, it really bothered me when I moved to New York. I was around every Harvard, MBA and suit and tie, and it got me in my head big time. And then I started to really figure out what I was really good at, what my strengths were. There's a great thing called the Strengths Fighter. You believe it's free. I would encourage everyone to do that and just see right in front of you what you're good at. And remind yourself of that, because this lifestyle is brutal on everybody, friends, families, founders. It's helpful to come back and remember why you're good at things. I don't often see imposter syndrome is good in any speech. And I was actually in Cincinnati when we kind of thought about this. And I was like, I think that maybe imposter syndrome is a good thing. Does everyone have a basic understanding of what imposter syndrome is? And but it's usually something that terrifies, cripples, stops progress. And we started to think about it, and we started to say, well, hold on, why do I feel like an imposter? Well, it's because I'm pushing the envelope on something. I'm stepping out of my comfort zone, of which I feel perfectly, not an imposter in. And I think once I started to think about it differently, started to mentor differently about imposter syndrome and to use it as a good thing, that means you're doing it. That means you're going for it, and it still has something to be dealt with. But I hope everyone can leave here tonight just understanding, or at least thinking through, how, when I feel that way, could that be a good thing? And how might it be a good thing? Unfair advantage, storytelling. after I worked with the founder of Killer Creamery for a while, I asked him if, what were the two most important things that I could have taught you or thought about. And Louis, you remember what you said? And stage fit, but that's all right. That was after we botched like the 7th VP of sales hire. Yeah. Storytelling. It's everything. It is absolutely everything in business. It's absolutely everything in money raising. It's something that never stops. And I think I was talking to someone that I've worked with before, and they said, you're such a good storyteller that I bet your wife hates you. I know I'm really kicking myself in front of my wife tonight, but that's probably fair. But yes, like I've learned to be able to pull a story, a spin, a narrative about anything in a company. And I am usually pretty good at making it a positive thing. I also tell the story, and if there's things that I need to be outlining as risks or cautionary signs, I started to load those up in my conversations. And we always talk about, I tell a founder, dude, start out by saying, here's all the risks in my deal. And they all hate me for it. But no one wants to do that. I don't know that anyone actually really has. One of my proudest moments in life is we were raising money and got to talk to some investors, and they had never done a CPG deal ever, consumer packaged goods. And Louis was in the room with me. And I said, every time you see a CPG deal, you should light it on fire. And he's freaking out, like losing his mind. And you know what? Still got the check. Still worked. Being honest about the risks in your business up front as an investor, most investors are going to sit here and think about, I shouldn't say most, many investors, angels especially, are going to sit there as you're presenting and they're saying, I'm listening for what I disagree with. I'm listening for this red flag that I've run into before. I'm not listening to you. I'm listening in my head to see where you're going to go from. And it's pretty practical, but if you can think about it, if I tell you right up front the things that you're going to find wrong or you will later find wrong, you can listen to me. And I'm not saying don't do this if you don't want to, or we can talk, but I lead with the risks all the time. And since I started doing that, telling a story, being completely candid about the things that are good, being completely candid about the areas where I'm nervous about, I've only got better as a fundraiser. My fundraising performance moved up orders of magnitude by being honest. I don't come in and tell you that we're the Uber of this or that. I come in and say, look, I think from an operational perspective, our risks are this, this, and this. But that said, here's where I think the opportunities are. And again, has never failed me. Well, no, it hasn't. Favorite slide. For anybody that knows Jeff Reynolds, local guy, had a nice chat on his porch during the pandemic. And I don't know, I'd never met him, truthfully, when I was on his porch. And the first thing I start going off about is, I hate pitch decks, similar to tonight. And I was like, I really just feel like sometimes pitch decks are coloring books. I don't mean to rag on pitch book or on pitch decks, but I don't want to use them as a crutch. And I don't want to, the deck is not what gets the deal done. I promise you. And maybe somebody can argue with me with that, but what gets the deal done is candid storytelling. If an investor says no, all that means is like, keep giving me a couple more updates. Keep telling the story. And as you're raising a round, I think about a fundraise as like, okay, I'm going to start the fundraise with my early pitch, but it's like a card game to me. I'm like, where is that next piece of story I'm going to get along the 3 or 4 months that I'm raising? Like, where might I get a material win in sales? When are we going to hire a new person that brings a lot of credibility? And it's the constant storytelling and playing along the way from either a no or yes that is unstoppable in fundraising. The way I think about it is I'm going to tell people all the good things until they either say, cool, we're in, or stop it, you're annoying the absolute shit out of me. And I have had that happen before.
The cool you're in, or stop it?
Had both.
Okay.
Another one's like, shut up. My goal is like, if you need to just stop telling you all the great things that we're actually doing, happy to do that. But usually it's pretty foolproof. Valuations. I mean, I think valuation is a very tricky thing. Again, I think there's a lot of first-time founders that come at that sort of reading TechCrunch or Recode or comping themselves next to somebody else that raised money. And back to what I said earlier, being overvalued is not a great thing. It's not a great position to be in unless you have, well, unless you have more than certainty that the next phase of your business is like you're pricing yourself to perfection, meaning that every step in that phase has to be perfect. And I don't know one startup that's ever done that. I don't know one startup where being priced to perfection is a good thing. So I hope people keep that in mind. The other thing that I find out a lot is that when I'll leave that one alone. Next one. Unfair advantage, mental models. How do I think about the things that I think about? Where does my mind do when an investor pulls out or an employee quits or I end up with 10 times the sales opportunities that I thought I had? How do you think about the things that are constantly happening in your business? And I would say if there's one thing that I think probably separates life and death, it's mental models. It's being able to constantly keep learning and constantly keep finding analogies and things that can help you continue to make better decisions. A mental model we use all the time is what's my risk of doing nothing? What if I do nothing? What happens? And in a startup or a growth stage company, oftentimes the risk of doing nothing is actually really bad. But we try to filter lenses on top of decision making because it's really hard to do. This is a great Charlie Munger quote. And I heard it in one of their, I'm such a geek that I've listened to the Berkshire Hathaway shareholder conference on YouTube, literally back to the 70s. And those things are long. So I'll paraphrase and kind of hyperphrase. Mind's not trained well enough to make an easy decision right. I need to think about that for a second. Mind's not trained well enough to make an easy decision right. We don't know what we don't know. And Nick's, if I had to make a decision about something at the venture college without his experience, without him being around the day-to-day, if I don't have my mind trained well enough to be, empathetic, aware, knowledgeable about what's going on, what's an easy decision for him is a really hard decision for me. And I think this is another part of just continuously learning. I think the only superpower I have, and the one thing I'll take the Pepsi challenge with anybody here on, is you will never outlearn me, never. I'm obsessed, and probably to a point that's not that healthy. But I want to keep refreshing mental models. I want to keep having a better lens on decision making. I want to keep learning different communication skills that are going to make me better, make our team better, and make the outcome hopefully better. But I think it really is kind of falling in love with the process. Like if you fall in love with the exit, and we've done this before, it's one of the biggest mistakes I think I've made around Killer Creamery was we raised a really exciting round, and I'd had some experience in high growth CPG businesses that went on to raise $90 million over 4 years and sell for $500 million. And I took that lens, I think, to some of our teammates, and my mind was not well trained enough about the team. What I should have said is, let's keep making a great business. Let's keep improving, and let's fall in love with the process. Let's not fall in love with the next round, the big outcome. Falling in love with the process is probably what somebody will put on my tombstone. I really believe that, and it's helped me immensely. Thinking in bets. There's a great book, if anyone's an avid reader, by Andy Duke, who's a professional poker player. And she's got a business acumen, and she's talking about her poker mentality in a business setting. If you've never read it, at least go listen to the podcast about it. Thinking in bets, this is another thing we use all the time. And Liz, I'd ask you, do you feel that that's an unfair advantage to start thinking about moves and decisions as bets?
Yeah, definitely. We're betting every single day.
Every single day, every single minute, every decision is a bet. The analogy to chess. So, business is like chess. You hear that a lot. No, I mean, not really. Chess has an implied infinite amount of moves on a board, right? Unless you're in a different company or setting than mine, we're betting on information we don't have. We're looking at the cards we have, and we're betting on the cards we think everyone else has, and we're putting money to work behind it. And they don't all win. I mean, there's no way every bet pays off. But that type of thinking in the early stage, that type of thinking in the growth stage keeps you aggressive. You are making bets. Anytime you get on the phone, anytime you deal with an employee, every time you hire, raise capital, allocate, that's a bet. And it's been super helpful for me to think about it that way. Because otherwise I get lost up. I get tied up in the perfectionist of the decision making. I get tied up in trying to control the outcome. When it just hit me super clearly, this is betting. And once I started to think about things in bets, my decisions got better, quicker. And when they didn't work, I'd already kind of let myself know because I knew it was a bet that was part of the risk, right? So that book is great if anyone has a chance to read it. But I just want you to think about tomorrow or tonight or the next time you're making a decision, what am I really betting on here? What information do I have in front of me? And what information am I betting against or for? Matt's Holy Grail. Honestly, this could be a million things, so I'm excited to see what everyone thinks. I've talked to more CEOs than most. I'm really obsessed, so I have to get good at this sport of entrepreneurship. I have injected myself, been a mentor, been an advisor. I worked for free for more people than anyone will ever know. But I was trying to update my models. I was trying to update my system. The more data that I have around me, the more experiences that I've made that are good or bad, that helps. And so one thing that's been clear to me is that if I'm a CEO or founder, like what mental models do I need? Like there's so many things to be good at. There's so many things to know. And the ones I'm going to list, there probably are 50 more. But these always struck me as very thought-provoking, and a couple are simple, so I'll just get right into it. I want to be with a learn-it-all over a know-it-all. The know-it-alls don't work in early and growth stage entrepreneurship. They just don't. I mean, they might for a minute, but they build way worse teams. The bets that they make are ones that are existential because they're not testing and learning. They just know it all. And I don't know if you've ever worked for someone like that or been on a team with someone like that, but they're horrible to be with. There is no growth mindset. There is no learning. It is just, I know it, you're dumb, I know it, and that's not the truth. I want to be a person and to be around people that are learn-it-alls. This one's kind of hard, but I threw it in here anyway. I like to be around people that have a way to think about building the product that builds the product. I want you to think about that. The company that builds the product, what's the company made of? People, right? The product is the thing you ship. The product of the company is the product that you build, the systems you create, the hierarchy, the decision trees, all that stuff. And you very rarely find people that have a way to think about that from day one or have even put 2 seconds into, well, hold on. How does my job as the CEO or COO, how does that work with their job? How does that job work with their job? And people get so wrapped up in the hierarchy and the titles, but they don't stop to think about the operating system that builds the product. Operating system that builds the product is the people. So I think about that over the next couple of days if you can remember, because it is a deep one, but it is super important. And I promise you, if you're ever in the room with VCs and you can bring something out in this bucket right here, your ability to be funded went through the roof because it's one of the most rare mental models for a first-time founder to have. But from so much painful experience, it is probably one of the most important. Hiring, business problems are easy. People problems are hard. They don't get any easier. And I think that this right here, if you can think about how to build the product that builds the product, you are going to be miles ahead of where I am even today, if you really put thought into that. And this goes back to, well, let's teach everyone to build decks and pitch. think about this. At least add that into your repertoire. You look, Nick, did you have
No,
something?
no.
Okay, thought you were going to yell at me.
No, not till later.
And then again, starts with a person or a team or a company, starts with an obvious clarity of purpose. Vision and clear next steps we can do tomorrow, not next quarter, not in the next year in the projections. Like, how do we, this is the dream. This is why we exist. This is exactly what we do tomorrow to get there. You see so many, and I'm also guilty of it, like when you're thinking through projections and you're thinking through quarters, well, we're going to do this marketing initiative next quarter. We need to fire that broker. Let's just wait next quarter. It's really about the most rare thinkers in this entrepreneurship life are the people that can take you all the way to the back, the end of the story, the place where they are going to go, and they're able to articulate the steps back to the place they're standing in. Super hard. This is why I said it's the Holy Grail. But these are unfair advantages that you have no idea how important they are. These are the things in a VC room, if you are able to talk through this credibly, thoughtfully, it doesn't matter how bad your deck is. Unless it's inappropriate or has bad shit in it. But this right here is what gets things done. This is what makes reputations. This is what starts to build great teams. These things are incredibly important. And again, I have been part of not doing them. And I have seen what happens when I've been involved with a company that is only there for money. We want to make tons of money. Fine. I don't think there's no such thing as a purpose that isn't worthy. If that's big enough for you, great. People do make tons of money, and from that's being the objective. But this life of building companies is really hard. Anybody in the room, there's a bunch of people going through this experience there's only really two emotions: terror and euphoria. And the lack of sleep and the amount of stress enhances both. And I do really believe that. So again, having that true north, whatever that is, something that is bigger than you, bigger than the capital, like that can just keep you getting up in the morning motivated when things suck. Like, these are the things that really good, successful, later down the road, rich founders do. And then the ones that don't sit here and disgruntled after year 4, and they're like, shit, that was so easy. But now it's too late. Now I've got an infrastructure of people. I've got a team that's fatigued. I've got nobody thinking about why they're here. And if you've ever been part of running the old gas tank low by around payroll and had to make pretty hard decisions on, sorry, Angela, we ran out of money and it should be good in a couple of weeks. What happens when you don't have a purpose? Angela's gone, typically. And she should be, right? You didn't do the work to rally them, her, everybody around the big thing. And the big thing can be money, but again, I don't know anybody that has done it perfectly. A good friend of mine was the first COO, CFO of Dropbox. And I was asking him about some of this stuff. I was more importantly asking him, like most people do, like what was really hard about your first 4 years? And he's like, I'm going to sound like a dick. But he goes, what was hard was to turn down the money. They lived in San Francisco. Dropbox was super simple, easy to use, and they caught fire with the VCs. And he wasn't saying it to be mean. He was like, no, this was a realistic problem because the different political risks and fund over here, their hardest part was thinking about how they turn people down. And for most founders, especially over in markets like this, that's the dream. We hope investors are going to chase us. We hope to have that problem, but it's a problem nonetheless. And it still requires mental models. It still requires gaming things out. It still requires really, really tactical assessments about where you are, where you're going, who they are. It just isn't an easy path, even if you get the funding. As we talked about before, capital doesn't fix anything, right? So if I didn't do the hard work of putting my leadership team together, putting my purpose together, my plans, that capital just made your life 10 times worse. And you only get one chance to raise money, to do the deck and do the pitch. And then it's after the money hits, it's what you do, not what you say, to see if you're going to get to another round. That's the scary part, because it's like, I can't bullshit anybody anymore. I got the money. I framed up what I was going to do with it, where we were going to get. And if I don't get to that place, then, they're not going to give me more. So again, back to ragging on everybody worrying about the pitch. Like these other things are, if you're able to execute well, that money will raise itself. This one's not hard to, this one's probably the easiest of the group, but obviously execution matters a lot, a lot. But I also think it's about like you have to keep perfectionism away. You have to keep perfectionism out of the decision. Like there's a quote, and Vance, you said it earlier, but I forgot who said it. But if you're not embarrassed by your first release of your product, you started too late. You rolled it out too late, right? I think that good plan, basic plan, average plan, executed aggressively, executed well. Shit, well, now I'm going to learn, right? Now I'm into the learning phase. What did we learn? Post-mortem, did it go well? Did it not go well? I need to simplify things. I am from Nebraska. I'm a farm kid. I need to simplify things because I'm not that smart naturally. So I have to find analogies in my head and ways to make sense of things so that I could go back again and execute it. Do it again. Just like rinse, repeat. You will never stop doing them before. And if you kind of throw more in here, execute, feel bad about themselves. Execute, blame someone else for the things that didn't go right. You can see how these other words that pop in there are absolutely just wrecking balls. This one pisses people off, and it's going to be an interesting one. You commonly hear, what's the idea worth? TM brings me the idea. What's the idea really worth? Well, in my opinion, the idea is worth a point. The strategy is worth 2 points. And the fucking execution is worth 97. That's it. Like, and I feel bad for the dreamers and the idea people, but the idea is new shit. It's the start. Strategy, okay, execution. Relentless, fearless. I know I'm going to make mistakes. I know everybody around me is going to make mistakes. Execute, learn, simplify, execute, learn, simplify. And telling you, you will get the places you will get quickly are insane. And the amount of learning that's going to happen between you and your team is just absolutely insane. If you have a way to think about the product that builds the product. Leadership, probably a no-brainer here, but that's important, super important. As we've discussed a little bit about, this is not I'll put it this way. When I started my first company in 2012, I thought it was going to be awesome. I thought that like, because you call yourself a founder, like it was private jets and champagne, baby. And I went homeless for a year, legitimately homeless on the street. Well, in a car, then on the street. And you realize quickly that like, this is really hard. My wife says this, and I want to preface this by saying what she says is not a compliment to me. My wife says, we were talking earlier and she said, we were talking about this is a gladiator sport. Any way you look at it, but that's not good. That doesn't mean that that's a good thing for people. Do most people need to be out there risking financial freedom, time, waste, all that stuff? Like it is a gladiator sport. There just isn't any other way to say it. And for 97% of people, that's not a good thing. And I'm never going to be part of encouraging people to ditch their job, bag their marriage, not think about their kids to go start something. Because if you even ask me, probably not a gladiator. You just do. And again, I don't want to make that sound like that's something that's admirable or to aspire to. I just want you to think about that, about what you really are doing when you walk this path. Louis, what did you give up? What did you give up to start after your cush job? What did the first 2 years of your life look like?
Well, I sold my four-wheeler,
Oh, damn.
so that was kind of a bummer. Gave up some equity in their house. Pretty much gave up everything, honestly. All my comforts from corporate world, the things that people have.
When's the last time? When did you start getting a paycheck?
Last year.
When did you start it?
Very recent.
Yeah. And how many times did you move money around from your personal account to the business?
Pretty many.
Yeah. Gladiator sport, man.
100%.
Yeah. And I know that I'm lucky I got to walk this path and do all my crazy stuff and figure this out before I met my wife, honestly, because now, knowing I have a wife and a beautiful son, there's not a chance I would do this. Not a chance. Timing is everything. And again, I want to make this intentional that don't aspire, don't pick up tech. If this isn't for you, if you don't have probably some trauma in your life that motivates you to be this relentless gladiator for something, don't do it. Start a side hustle. Make sure that before you commit to this kind of life full on, realize the risks, please, because there's so many people that have their families ruined, or, they're betting a lot. And I don't mean to sound negative, but these are all the things I wish people would have told me on day one. Now I'm crazy. I would have probably blown right past it and I'd still be sitting here, but I just want you to think about the risks because people get hurt. My wife makes so many sacrifices, it's not even funny. Lewis's wife makes so many sacrifices, it's not even funny. And with no real idea if it's going to work or not. There's no way to know if it's going to work. Of course, we're crazy, we believe it will. But from their perspective, I can only imagine what they really think. So again, I don't want to be on a bar stool anymore about this, but just make sure you know what you're giving up. Back to leadership. This again sounds probably pretty obvious, but we break this all the time. Simply telling someone what to do and expecting that result is not leadership at all. And it's been a privilege to start working with some of the Killer Creamery team and other teams that I have. And again, we are not great leaders. We have a long way to go, but it's important to me because back to the product that builds the product, the ups and downs, the terror and euphoria, people need to know that they can count on you. People need to know that you will be essential to them. People need to know that you will have their back and that you have their best interest at heart. People want to know that they feel valuable. They want to hear when they're doing a good job. They want to get better. They want you to teach them how to get better. But so many of us, and a lot of it's the frustration and stress of the life, come back to this. Oh, Shelly sucked, or Maddie sucked. They're fired. And the number one thing is, bro, you suck. As a leader, they do not suck. There are no bad teams, only bad leaders. And these are all things, as I was a bad leader, horrible. These are all things I wish I would have, somebody would have sat me down candidly and said, this is what you're doing, and this is where it will lead. And so again, I want to be part of that for anyone else. Mental health. So obviously I painted this amazing, rosy, productive, very optimistic picture of what this life looks like, right? Mental health is everything, and it's not just for entrepreneurs and not just for for company builders or VCs or whatever. Mental health is everything for everybody, and yet it's the one thing, and we're getting a little bit better at it, but the one thing really that we don't want to talk about. It's a great book, transformational in my life, to be honest with you, called Thinking in Neutral Thinking. So it's a term that was coined by a guy who just passed away, Trevor Moawad, and his dad wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul. Trevor ended up being like one of the most famous and well sought after athletic performance coaches, mental trainers for special forces, Alabama, Georgia, professional sports teams. And what he did was really brilliant, and the way he thinks about things and talks about things is brilliant. If I am not, the whole purpose is to get back into neutral. If I'm worrying about what's before me, ahead of me, or I worry what's out behind me, like that doesn't work. I mean, get yourself into neutral. And there's one example, there's a couple. Russell Wilson is in his book a lot. And the speech they give at halftime, a quarterback does when they're down, when they're losing, is, one quarterback raises their hand and says, well, look, if they can score that many points, we can. Super optimistic, hyper optimistic. Doesn't work. The other one says, well, look, I mean, we're really screwed. Like, we should just stop. This doesn't, we're down so much. Like, let's just give up. The other person in the middle, the neutral mindset thinker, says, we got to fucking fight. We're going to fight. We're going to get first downs. I don't know what the score will be. I don't know what will happen, but I do know if we go out and move the chains, we're going to be fine. And that is a way of thinking about things that is super helpful when you're in this life, in any life, to be fair. Get yourself back to neutral. And please, if you get a chance, again, usually what I do is go listen to podcasts first and then buy book. But there's a couple of great podcasts. Trevor Moawad, who just passed away super young. Give it a listen. At least give the podcast a listen if you're bored, because this right here is absolutely an unfair advantage. This is an unfair advantage in every aspect of life. Okay, it's my belief that being mentally unsound is one of the biggest assets a founder or high performer has. Crazy. I mean, being crazy, if you are going to be a gladiator and whatever, being crazy helps. It really helps. Being mentally unsound. I remember when my poor wife's getting filleted here, but there's so many good, she's like the pinnacle of like beauty and health and like stability. And here I am, wild. And when we were dating, she said, where do you want to be in 5 years? Have you ever asked a founder or an entrepreneur where they want to be in 5 years? You know what's that answer usually look like? I said, look, I have no idea, but I can promise you this, it will not be boring. And she was like, huh, okay. Probably called her mom and she's like, we're in so much trouble. Yet, the first thing most of us want to do is bury that deep, all the vulnerability, all the things that make us crazy and make us gladiators, make us, great musicians, talented authors, great 9-to-5 employees. Like the best high performing people in anything are crazy. They're obsessed. They have things about them that used in another way could make them drug addicts. They have something about them that used in another way could make them, serial killers. But I don't know. Maybe that's not the right way to say that. Sorry. But maybe. But again, it's the one thing, and it's getting a little bit better now, but in the entrepreneurship community specifically, being able to talk to people, being able to have, Lewis and I were talking, a couple, last summer when it was just a really kind of slow, weird summer. And I remember saying, look, raising the money, worrying about the investors, putting all that together, at least we have each other like hugging in the storm. Because I've done it before and he's done it before when you don't have that. And it's a slippery slope, man. Really, really slippery slope. So don't bury it down. This is 2022. Like there has not been anything we haven't been able to productively talk about as opposed to mental health. Like all of a sudden our vulnerabilities and the things we don't like about ourselves have been the ability to have a positive light shown on them. But don't like this stuff. It doesn't matter if you're a founder or not. Do not bury that deep down inside. Call me, Matt. I said this last time, no one emailed me, but mattandpriceandpartner.com. I'll figure it out. We have great executive coaches. I'll even help you pay for them. You have to be a little crazy to be successful. TM, I brought this in for you right at the end here. My last talk I gave, I asked TM a couple days ago, I said, what was the one-liner in there? I speak in analogy, I speak in riddle. What's the one thing that you remembered? He's like, think about it. He goes, that one thing that you said about build a company that's so simple that any idiot can run, because someday someone will. Complexity doesn't work when you're building and scaling companies. It just doesn't. If the more complex the plan, the more complex the wires that are hanging out. I always love magicians. I've done an unusual amount of research on magicians. Seriously. And the magician's process is so interesting because they teach themselves the trick. One of the things they do is they hide the wires. They hide all the things that would show you what they're doing, right? A company building is kind of like that. We have to hide the wires. We're doing the trick. We're doing the thing. But to get to there is not magic. There is no such thing as magic. So how do we hide the wires? Simplify things. The reason Dropbox took off, anybody will always tell you, is that they had the most simple user interface possible. They did not try to over-innovate. They didn't put features in there. They took a very basic idea. They kept it very basic. They didn't make it for me, who I get scared when I watch coders go to work. I literally get terrified. I really do. They did not make it for me. They made it for someone who is not a coder. But the wires underneath there are built by really, really smart coders. The difference is they were able to simplify. And it's a very hard thing when you're an artist, high performer, growing titan to stop and simplify things, because usually what you want to do is you want to keep sounding smart, probably like I'm doing on this talk, and you start dumping more stuff into it, and that doesn't scale. It just doesn't. You end up having to worry and refix all that stuff. I cannot give an employee leadership direction if it's complex. Classic battlefield 101. Like, things have to be simple. Simple is what makes this all work. Simple scales. My thank you slide is something that I heard it when I was younger. Everybody cuts their own deal. It's a Hulk Hogan quote. I think that's super important if you think about it. We're not owed anything. We all have the ability in our lives every single day to make decisions that cut our own deal. In the end, there's only one person responsible for everything in your life, and that's you. Everybody cuts their own deal. I love that Hulk Hogan is how I end things. And that is what I have for a deck. That I don't like decks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a darn good deck for a guy that doesn't like.
Well, advanced.
Cool. So I see we have a pretty active chat going on there, but maybe we'll just open it up to questions, comments, thoughts from you all, and then we'll start sorting through the chat. We'll field some questions there too. So,
Matt, talk about stage fit. It's one of the other key takeaways.
Yeah, totally.
And I learned from you. You mentioned it earlier when we were talking about this.
Yeah, stage fit's gnarly. It's somebody making a very minimal amount of money does not hire Ernst & Young to do your taxes. You don't, if I have my broken foot, I don't go to the top of, hospital special surgery. You have to take that approach in the way you're hiring. Because again, most people usually in pursuit of more capital raising or credibility, just bring in somebody from a giant company. Or they bring in somebody that's like they were hired when the company was at 500 million in sales to do the job when it was at 5 million in sales. And I think that's something that makes hiring so hard. And again, back to mental models, like you have to game these things out. Those people that have giant credibility are probably awesome, but they're not awesome at the place you're at. But that's stage fit is Lewis's favorite two things. He didn't say story and stage fit. Those are the two very painful lessons.
We have a question in the chat. Could you elaborate more on keeping things simple in context of fundraising from your last slide?
Keeping things simple and fun in terms of fundraising. Yeah, I think that if you've ever been part of a pitch or selling anything where like you start to sell a little too hard and you start to talk about features and you start to talk about too many like bright, shiny whistles. Simplicity, I'm asking Vance to invest in my concept, my idea, my company. He's an incredibly smart guy. He's published, self-published. Yeah, but again, we overestimate, I think, a lot of times about how much information people can absorb in one sitting. And investors need, just like anybody else, need to be spoon-fed. They need to be, okay, I'm excited, tell me more. And there's some showmanship, like take a conversation that you think you're going to jam in 2 hours and bring it across, a week in small bits. I don't know if that's a perfect answer, but it's the one that came to my mind.
Your point on leadership, do you have any, I guess, kind of combining the leadership and the mental models thing, perhaps when you are sometimes in a stressful, stuck spot or something like that? Like, what are there certain models that you like to use in that context to kind of get you out of that?
Yeah.
In order to treat your employees correctly or whatever it might be.
What's always worked for me since the minute I turned my life to a place where I wanted to be of great impact to people. There was a period in my life where I was an incredibly selfish person, and selfishness was not a great look on me. And I say that to say usually what we're obsessed with in our lives today is because there was a flaw or a trauma in our lives yesterday, right? And mine, again, I live as just an unaccountable, kind of a trash person. And accountability to me is everything. Accountability to me is freedom. Accountability is to me the ultimate control. When I don't blame others, when I look at myself first and I say, okay, so even if I wasn't the person that actually made the mistake, it still was my fault because I was the person who was entrusted to make sure mistakes don't happen. And there's a great book, and we have one of our employees who's really deep into some of the programming and stuff, which is extreme ownership. I think there's a book for anybody. You want total control over your decisions and thoughts in situations. That's a great one. That one, and then neutral thinking is sometimes I have to go back to, I get caught up in either in the results I'm looking for, or I get too caught up behind me of something that hurt, or a vulnerability that stings. So it's just kind of like, shut up, move the chains, and fight. So, but it takes a lot of work to like program yourself to think like that, all the time.
Can you repeat the name of that book?
Extreme Ownership.
Thank you.
Jocko Willink. Did I say his name right? Willink. Great book. And while we're on great book topics, there's two more that I would recommend. I always said that I would never give these out to people because they were so dangerous how effective they are. And I had given some out, and sure enough, someone took my advice and stuff and raised a bunch of money and ripped a bunch of people off. So I'll trust the audience because I think I know most of them. Two books that will change everything about how you present and pitch and raise money. One of them is called Flip the Script. Flipping the Script is an amazing book. There's a book written by the same author, and it's escaping me now, but called Pitch Anything. And I'm always like pretty happy to hear like they're not at the trailhead. Because you want to talk about resources that if you can pull those off are wildly effective, those two are. So we could talk about books all night.
What advice would you give an early entrepreneur after making a bad bet, or like a bad decision?
Yeah. Making a bad bet. Well, inevitably you'll take it personally, and inevitably you'll think that this is the end of the world. But the faster that you can get out of blaming yourself or thinking about it, like the faster you can get into learn. Like I didn't make a bad bet. I made an incorrect bet on this hand. What did I learn from it? Put it back into place. Mistakes of character are a little bit different because that brings on shame, and there's a whole bunch of other things. But if you can get away with not making mistakes of character, life gets a lot easier.
So how would you do that?
That is a whole other talk, and I would not be the person to have that one. No.
Do you have any insight on it?
To live without shame.
No,
I was gonna say that my TED talk would be like, I'd wait for that. I wait to have that TED talk then.
No, just gauging people's character.
Yeah, I don't. Not that I could share that wouldn't, that would be any bit of helpful. Yeah. Mental models, history, but if you have extreme ownership and extreme accountability, it's amazing how many of those things don't hurt anymore. Yeah.
Actually, I have two questions.
Yeah.
The first was you kind of talked about like the Moneyball approach.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that's kind of like the baseball.
Yep.
Maybe just expand on that. And then the second thing is you said you kind of like lost focus from the team and the product to kind of fundraising. And when you like reshifted your focus, what did you say to the team to kind of realign the team and their focus?
I think what you mentioned was that back when, well, I didn't say, well, put it this way, I didn't say enough quick enough. I mean, there's a couple of people standing in this room that were affected by that. I put an absolute unrealistic amount of pressure on team without knowing about the product that builds the product. And I should have known about product that builds the product before I had any sort of expectations or certainly gave any instructions of how fast we should go. Right. And so how did I correct it? I don't know. I think I actually said something about it 6 months later, because I just assumed I was right because I have a big ego. And finally, like I was able to step outside myself. I saw what was happening to the people. I could see they were unusually stressed. And I realized that people don't want the same thing exactly as me. Some people just want to be in it to build a cool business for a long time. And again, I can't come back enough to build the product that builds the product. The other one, I can give you a website. I can give you a little bit more information on that, but actually, there's an LP in that same fund. Vance, will you give me a break and talk a little bit about the Connetic model?
with the rental.
Yeah. What was your question?
Oh, so just, like the Moneyball, like kind of explain on that, the approach to that, because I think, Moneyball, it's like, hey, we can't compete against like the Yankees, the Red Sox, but we're gonna take the resources that we do have and use data and statistics and kind of practically, kind of how do you, that?
So the venture fund, I think it's a really interesting model. Like everybody think, I think there's been enough studies now that interviews when we meet people are pretty unreliable. In an interview, people are always sending their representatives with the best version of themselves to that meeting. And then we're always biased too to like people who are like us, which leads to a lot of, imbalances and who gets funded and all these kind of things. Well, basically what this system did is they were like, there's certain archetypes of founders and teams that are just historically more successful. Like somebody who's really into like sort of being like a bespoke artist may struggle traditionally as a CEO of a tech startup, right? Like, and that there's certain types that might be really good fits for a CEO role that maybe aren't great for a COO role in a company.
Yep.
And so what they did is like with kind of backwards analysis and forwards analysis to do what's basically like a DISC or a PI type test on people, and started aggregating, not having kind of a preconceived notion of, what would make the best founders, and then seeing the same types over and over show up.
And then measured performance.
Yeah, of the like whatever 20 something, 24. So there's like 4 or 5 types that are sort of historically successful CEO types, and it's fascinating.
So these are all the various profiles in that platform. And Vance is right here, closer. So it's proactive and friendly. They're pretty proactive and friendly. But closer is the sweetest name of all of them. I think closer. Who doesn't want closers on them? Mine is I'm a strategist. So most assertive, shocker. Not good either. Proactive and assertive. A lot of times your salespeople tend to come over here, some over here. But the whole thing is built is there should be, not everybody in one bucket. Like don't think about your resumes or the backgrounds, but think about how if you can totally know how people are going to think, move, and communicate, then it becomes a lot easier to build a team without looking at what if, somebody said, I don't like women or I don't like minority, it takes the bias out of VC. At least I'm convinced it does. Because it just looks at people, types of people, and we don't take pitches in person first. We don't want to make that judgment first. I don't want to see TM come in front of me and say, funded. Because it's a popularity contest. I already like TM. But I have no idea who TM is. And the TM, anybody who they're pitching you something, it probably isn't exactly who they are. Entrepreneurs are very good salespeople. I'm one of them.
A question in the chat is, are there certain type of profiles more suited to be on?
That I don't know. That's a really good question, actually. These are the profiles that these enterprise or strategist, problem solver, disruptor, and accelerator are what most people in Connetic would think those are desirable founders, but they've had amazing outcomes with closers. So I think, and also, I need, if I'm a strategist, like who my team is, like who's my partner or co-founder, like I would, need somebody kind of over here to do that stuff, or maybe over here that's a lot more specific and exact. So it really is it's hard to tell, but if you look at an entire team of people and then you track them that you funded in, like you can pretty quickly figure out, okay, well, these people tend to do better. We've even looked at where in the country founders are doing the best, and we're right here, Rocky Mountain region. So they're only year 3 into the data. I think there's only 3 years of data so far. So I can only imagine in year 7, like how granular this is going to get. And I have never hoped something works more than this fund in this company, because I think it's game changing. Yep.
I'd see just from the models, I think you need all types, like to get as much of the wheel as you can to have a successful company. So it's not about necessarily which of these is a good entrepreneur, it's what role are you in?
Yeah, fair.
So like, people tend to be biased towards the CEO. It's all about the CEO. Well, sometimes that person's such a visionary that they don't get shit done. And so the other parts on the wheel, like, it's when you have improper fit.
Yeah.
Right, when you have somebody who's like, in this, they're trying to be this.
When you add timing to it, it gets infinitely more complex.
Totally.
What's the fit for year one is not a fit for year two. You might have to
Yep.
sit in the passenger seat or take a seat in the back.
It's hard to be a billionaire. That's the one thing I should have put on the slide.
Holy grail.
I'll let you know when I get there.
That's good prayer.
Yeah, right. Being a billionaire ain't easy. Being happy is not easy. I mean, a lot of that stuff isn't, but that's a whole other talk. Are we good? Thank you so much for coming, and I hope that was resourceful.